It is 11:30. You know what that means. It's time to talk all things people, power, and politics on this Wednesday. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. There is so much going on, and it is stuff that can be confusing, especially if you're stuck on your phone on that social media echo chamber. You don't know what's true and what's not. So toss that phone aside and just hang out with us for the next half hour as we give you the straight story. The biggest news of the day, President Donald Trump slapping tariffs on foreign cars, a move he believes will help manufacturing in the U.S. The president said these new taxes are permanent. Now, here's a look at what we know about them. The 25% import covers all auto imports. Now, this is according to the White House. They say they expect to raise $100 billion every single year on these tariffs. But here's where things get a little bit complicated. Automakers bring in parts for their cars, as you know, from all over the world, Mexico, Canada, everywhere. And economists say the cost could end up being passed on to us. You see, the average price right now for a new car is already sky high, starting at just about roughly $49,000 for the average. And that could go up even more if the tariffs are fully passed on to you. Economists say that could cause the average auto price to spike by $12,500, which, if you're doing the math at home, is more than $60,000 for the average price of a car once you add those tariffs up there. Now, we're already seeing how this is impacting stocks in the big three automakers. The markets closed before the announcement, but General Motors and Stellantis both fell by more than 3%. Ford stock, though, was up just slightly. This next one is a story that has so many of you talking on social media because of how it affects all of us. And this is what some of you are telling me right now. In fact, David says, buy American vehicles. Rita says that will likely impact us selling to them, as well as, I'm sure, the tariffs that will subsequently be placed on us. Lisa says if you buy an imported car, absolutely the price will go up. Buy American, simple as that. And Sarah says, so not only can average people not afford a home, they won't be able to afford a car either. Well, joining us now on the phone to talk about the impact these tariffs could have, WWJ News Radio auto reporter Jeff Gilbert. And Jeff, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
Sure, glad to.
Let's talk about what this means. So we know if we're talking about a Honda, a Kia, a Mazda, those are right away in our brains. We say, okay, those are obviously automakers that come from other countries. But there are cars that are made from U.S. automakers produced in other countries, like the Mustang and Chrysler minivans. How will that affect those vehicle sales?
Yeah, when you talk about the Mustang, it's strictly the Mustang Mach-E, the electric vehicle. It's made in Mexico. The actual Mustang itself is made in Flat Rock, so it doesn't even have to be imported into Michigan. But, you know, we're going to see this all kind of work through, but we understand a lot of the tariffs are going to be based on the amount of American parts in the vehicles as well. So there's going to be an interesting formula to determine exactly how much tariff is going to be paid on each vehicle.
You know, it's interesting because you often have reported on WWJ, and we've heard this a lot. How many times does a car go to other countries to pick up parts before it arrives in your driveway? And that's that algorithm or that formula that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's part of it. But if you take a look at that, the perfect example is a Ford F-150. It's about as all-American a vehicle as you can get. Many of them are made in Dearborn, Michigan. But the engines for that vehicle are made in Windsor, Ontario. But wait, the parts, many of the parts that go to that engine have to go from the U.S. to Windsor or another country to Windsor. So now you can see how those parts end up crossing the border a number of times.
Take us through the next few months here. These tariffs, let's say, go into effect sometime in April. What happens immediately, short term, and then long term?
Immediately, probably very little, because the tariffs don't go into effect until next week, and car makers have already moved a lot of vehicles, a lot of parts across the border. So in the short term, we're probably not going to see a big impact. But long term, we could see price increases, certainly increases in what it costs to make the vehicle. But of course, remember, the prices are set by supply and demand. And if car makers push the price up too much, they're not going to sell the vehicle, and then they have to discount it and maybe sell it for less than it costs to make it. So setting a price is a very tricky thing.
And finally, some interesting supporters of tariffs in general. We know that Sean Fain with the UAW has actually thrown his support to tariffs. Now, I'm not saying he supports 25% tariffs, but he certainly has said, hey, here's a nod to President Trump for finally holding other countries to account.
Well, he tries to avoid the name President Trump because, of course, he was no fan of him in the campaign, but he has praised tariffs. The UAW came out with a release very quickly after the tariffs were announced, and they say that now it's time to renegotiate USMCA, the deal that followed NAFTA. So, obviously the UAW is very much in favor of tariffs.
Jeff Gilbert, thanks for your time here tonight on The Pulse. We always appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.
Now to the other story that has everybody talking. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing attack plans against the Houthis in Yemen, shared on the messaging app Signal to a group chat that included a reporter from The Atlantic. It sparked calls that Hegseth, along with National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, should resign. And there's concern from both Democrats and Republicans on the Capitol. Despite those calls, President Trump is really kind of downplaying this. He says he's standing by his guy. He even doubled down on that in the White House today, using a phrase you've heard him say before.
Hegseth is doing a great job. He had nothing to do with this. Hegseth, how do you bring Hegseth into it? He had nothing to do. Look, it's all a witch hunt. Here we are talking about some of the greatest business deals ever made. The greatest companies in the world are moving into the United States, and you want to ask about whether or not Signal works. I don't know that Signal works. I think Signal could be defective, to be honest with you. And I think that's what we have to, because you use Signal and we use Signal and everybody uses Signal, but it could be a defective platform, and we're going to have to find that out.
Something to keep in mind, Congress now is questioning if the information sent via Signal, that app, is classified information. And that included one representative reading from the Department of Defense manual on classified information. This is Democrats blast Hegseth for the blunder.
Information shall be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause describable damage to national security. This includes military plans, weapon systems, or operations.
That's also an accurate quote.
Even after the administration confirmed the authenticity of the texts, Secretary Hegseth continued to deflect and blame the reporter. He does something really damaging to national security, and he blames the reporter who his people sent the information to. What gall? This is the Secretary of Defense. This is the man leading our troops into battle and is meant to protect Americans and our national security at all costs.
Now, just today, The Atlantic, that publication where the editor was on that chat there on Signal, actually put the entire Signal text thread out there among senior officials that accidentally included that journalist. So here's what we know about that. While the White House said no classified information or war plans were shared, Hegseth did share multiple details about the impending strike, including the strike window down to the minute details, including when the F-18s would launch and where the person they referred to as the target terrorist was actually located. Now, Hegseth's spokesperson says that was not classified, just updating the group on a plan that was already happening. And here's another interesting note. The acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Christopher Grady, was not included in that group text. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was the person authorized to decide if he should be included. And it's not clear tonight why he wasn't. So certainly a complicated story, and now questions about just how secure some of these apps actually are. Joining us now to talk about all of this is Joe Taveras. He's an expert, actually, when it comes to not only point-to-point messaging, but information security issues in general. And Joe, we thank you for joining us here tonight on The Pulse.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rube.
So look, most of the people on the other side of that camera are not experts on social media apps or on encrypted or not encrypted. Kind of lay out how this works, the technology for us.
Yeah, so encryption at its base level is a math problem that is very difficult for computers to solve, but very easy for them to confirm. So you essentially put your password in, and it's able to tell that your password matches what they're expecting. If you put the wrong password in, it's going to give a wrong answer, etc. That makes it very difficult to break. However, you do still have security holes throughout the chain of custody, right? Like when I send a message to you, generally speaking, it's going to go through a centralized server and then bounce to you. So there is record of the message on that server or that service, and that's true across most of the apps.
But there's different apps out there. So for instance, there's WhatsApp, where people internationally communicate. That's owned by Meta. There's just regular text messages that we would do on our cell phones. And then there's this Signal. talk for a moment about what Signal is and what level of security is on that.
Sure. Signal is using the same algorithms as everybody else, so it's an implementation that they're using. It's end-to-end encrypted, and what that means is when I send you a message, before it goes over the network, it's secured with a key that you and I have access to, but nobody else does. So when I connect with you on Signal, it would send me your public key and confirm that we're able to communicate. And then after that, it would wrap the message and then send it over a secure connection.
When you hear it, again, we're going to take you out of the firing squad of those on social media who make so many things political. But when you look at the exchange between the people on this string, you have the Atlantic journalist that was on there, you had Mr. Walls, and you had Hegseth all on that particular string. Why is it that we're hearing, hey, we didn't know that this reporter was on the string? How does that work? A third person, would they arbitrarily be just included in this, and the other people wouldn't know about it?
So that's part of the reason I think we generally use like secure communication facilities that are connected in such a way where eavesdroppers or accidental parties cannot be included. But Signal makes it easy to add people in. So if you're connected, like you and I share a key, I can add you into a message group, and there's nothing to prevent that.
But the person who's holding the meeting is the one who has that key to invite a third person. So if you and I are having a conversation on Signal, and we said, hey, let's get Florida Director Chris, who's here at Fox 2, involved with this, it would be up to you who's in charge of starting that call to include him, yes?
That's my understanding, yeah. I believe you can set the chat settings to, delete messages in a certain amount of time, or allow other people to invite, or make other people administrators.
But I couldn't just drop in as a third-party person.
No, they wouldn't be able to like get a link to a meeting and go to that. It doesn't work like that. You'd have to be directly connected and exchange that key for that to work.
Talk about what is used in government and in high-tech companies and other places. These are pretty common apps that people use when they're trying to have highly kind of secretive conversations, right?
Absolutely, and it's good up until a point, but I think there's limitations on where we should trust those systems. War planning would be certainly one of them. The reason for that is with like a SCIF room, secure information facility, you know exactly where the tunnels are, which computers are connecting to what networks, etc. With Signal, anybody that's on that conversation is able to decrypt those communications. So if you accidentally drop a journalist in, there's nothing preventing them from being able to access all of that.
You heard the president say, hey, there could be something defective about Signal, the app itself. Is that something that happens? Is that highly possible? Or could it be that perhaps it was user error?
I can't speculate on like the quality of Signal, but that seems unlikely.
Let's talk for a moment about what this does to change things. You're in the world of cybersecurity. Does this change things for companies, organizations, government organizations moving forward?
Likely no. I look at Signal as more of a replacement for SMS. As you know, there's groups that are invading our telecom network, so those are basically party lines now. So we prefer to use Signal just for standard communications, but generally speaking, like companies would prefer you to use their line of communication. If they have Signal and they choose to use Signal, that's generally what you would do. If they use Slack, you'd use Slack. You'd use their email implementations, etc.
Is Signal used widespread across the country a lot?
I've seen it from a few organizations. It's not necessarily widely used. It's mostly in secure circles that are working with like government contracts and things like that. But again, when you're dealing with like ITAR or war planning, things like that, it's best to keep that on the system that it was intended to be on.
All right, Joe Taveras, good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse tonight. Cyber risk expert. It's good to always have you on. Thank you. Teslas and their charging stations now targeted by people trying to protest Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. We're talking about the company and the government's messaging. That's next on The Pulse. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. And joining us to talk about the fires at Tesla dealerships, charging stations, the cars themselves from a messaging standpoint, Matt Friedman. He's the co-founder of Tanner Friedman Public Relations. I should say this, a former intern like myself here at Fox 2 many moons ago when this was TV2, Eyewitness News. It is so good to see you again. Thanks for joining us, Matt. All right, I want to talk about messaging here. So you have this crisis. Tesla is kind of targeted. And it seems to be many people on the left that are angry at Doge and Elon Musk. And so what are they doing? They're attacking some of these dealerships violently. Some of them just saying, hey, let's drop the stock. Let's make everything plummet. What do you do if you work at a Tesla dealership and you're dealing with this?
It's tough. Tesla has made themselves a target because Elon Musk has been part of their brand for a long time. He's no anonymous executive. In fact, he's the opposite of that. So given all of the controversies about his role in the federal government and the desire that so many people have to try to do something to voice their displeasure, it's no surprise that Tesla dealerships that are located in major communities all over the country would become targets. But they should be targets for protest. I don't think any professional communications advisor in the country would ever recommend violence or destruction of property. It's counterproductive. It takes over the story, and it's morally wrong, and it's going to not help the cause that any protester is trying to perpetuate by showing up at a dealership for a protest.
It's just such a strange world we live in where you think to yourself, maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, you'd said, hey, it seems as though the electric car movement is mainly being driven, if you will, by many Democrats who want cleaner air and other things. And the Republicans, even during the election, many Republicans were saying, electric cars. And yet now Elon Musk, who's like the Doge guy from Trump, is in charge of one of the largest electric car companies in the world.
It really makes no logical sense, and it really shows you how flawed the politicization of electric cars was from the beginning, because it's so malleable for either side to try to make it their own. But it's not surprising that a reasonable person would question what's going on here. Elon Musk gave the Trump campaign hundreds of millions of dollars. In exchange, it appears, he is a prime decision-making seat for the future of the federal government. And that really doesn't meet the smell test for a lot of Americans, of both parties, of neither party. And it's no surprise that his marquee and flagship business, most consumer-touching business, would be impacted by this.
And then you think about the people, and by the way, there are very few people who are actually violently blowing up cars and doing this kind of work. However, it's pretty disturbing and very damaging. These are folks, many times, who are on the left, who are attacking people's cars who may be on the same political aisle. And that's the strange irony of all of this.
Yeah, they're going to fail in the court of public opinion. In the court of law, the administration now is talking about charging hate crimes and things like that. But anybody who vandalizes, anybody who has any sort of violence or criminal behavior in the act of protesting will lose, and lose badly, in the court of public opinion. As reasonable people, and we try to use that similar reasonable person standard to what gets used in negligence cases in court, that's how I try to look at it from a PR perspective. Reasonable people will agree that it's wrong.
Has reason changed significantly in the last 4 or 8 years?
I don't think so. I don't think the way that we approach crisis PR or day-to-day PR and advising clients has changed that much. But what you've seen now is a president who can really get away with anything. The rules of public opinion don't really apply to him. Look at what he's been accused of and convicted of and found guilty of, and he still got reelected. And I think that he is the aberration of aberrations, the exception of exceptions. Day to day, the way that human behavior is judged really is different from how he is judged.
And things have changed in that manner. I saw an interesting picture of someone who actually has one of the Tesla trucks, and they took the Tesla logo off and they put Toyota on the back just for the hell of it so that they wouldn't be damaged. I think that was the joke. But the bottom line right now is, what does someone do if they own a Tesla dealership, work for Tesla, in this court of public opinion, to try to be reasonable and say, hey, we still want to sell our cars.
Well, I think all the Tesla dealerships are owned by Tesla. It's vertically integrated, as I understand it. But yeah, there are employees, people working in Tesla dealerships here in Metro Detroit who live in our neighborhoods or just trying to make a living, trying to probably make a pretty good living in terms of those jobs are concerned. And hopefully those people will be left alone, and the protest will be geared toward Elon Musk. That's where the protest is really focused in terms of the average protester, and the employees can be left alone to do their jobs. I think that would be effective public relations by the protest organizers.
It costs a hell of a lot more to take a flight and a group of people to head over to Washington and pick up some big signs and protest in front of the Capitol, but perhaps less costly when it comes to the damage you cause by doing these other things. And so, Matt Friedman, it's so good to see you as always. Thank you for coming and talking about this messaging.
I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. We're diving into some of the other big stories we're following next on The Pulse, including the executive order President Trump signed involving voting. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse on a Wednesday night. Let's face it, this news cycle is like drinking from a fire hose. A lot to keep up with every day. So let's get you up to speed with some of the other big stories we're following, starting with a federal appeals court refusing to lift an order banning the Trump administration from deporting using a 1798 law. We're talking about the Alien Enemies Act, which gives presidents vast powers to imprison or deport non-citizens during a time of war. Now, it's the first time the law has been used since World War II, which is also the last time Congress declared war. Turning now to elections, where President Trump signed executive orders to overhaul the entire system. It would require proof of citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections and demand all ballots be received by Election Day. The president repeatedly made claims that non-citizens were being allowed to vote on the campaign trail, even though studies show that is rare. Now, it's already illegal to vote if you are not a citizen. And the Department of Health and Human Services is pulling back billions of COVID-19 dollars for state and local health departments. We're talking a little more than $11 billion. The department says it's because the pandemic is over, but health department says it was used to track other illnesses like the flu and measles as well. And finally tonight, the Trump administration's push to dismantle the Department of Education has people right here in Michigan worried about keeping kids fed. You see, money from our state's free school breakfast and lunch program comes from the Department of Education. Governor Whitmer included the free food in her new budget. And now the question is if there's enough cash, enough money to keep it going if the federal funds disappear. One state senator talked to our own Tim Skubic with his thoughts.
Now we don't have any details of what they're going to cut in addition to the 4,000 employees that they're attempting to lay off. But right now it is creating a level of uncertainty that is very scary for our families and our educators who just don't know what to expect coming out of Washington, D.C.
Would you say there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to lose the federal funding?
I don't want to put a number on it because every day the story changes out of D.C.
That's why we come back every night. Research has shown kids get a better education if they're well fed. The senator says he's hopeful they will be able to get the cash to keep the program going. We all hope so. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, we'll see you back here tomorrow night.